We got Gators Breakdown here. We know we're business.
Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I am your host, David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC. Coming at you Monday night after Florida defeats LSU 27-16 in the Swamp. Joining me, as he does every Monday night, Will Miles. You can find him at Read and Reaction at Will Miles SEC. And then our special guest tonight, Dave Chauncey, employment, education, civil rights litigation attorney, right here in Jacksonville too, right, Dave? Yeah.
Right.
So right here in the 904. Hey, we got some 904 recruiting news to get into later on this episode as well for the Gators.
Some good recruiting news here these days.
Finally, and Billy Napier will even talk recruiting during the season, so we'll hear from him later on as well. But good stuff. Will, I got to see you over the weekend. Dave, you were in Gainesville as well. So Will, we'll start with you, man. But we'll get into it later on, but just a great weekend before the game, during the game, after the game, a fun one Saturday in the Swamp.
Yeah, I brought my 9-year-old Max down. He was the life of the party, or at least that's what people tell me. And Max has a way of bringing out the best in the Gators. He was there for Utah a couple years ago. Brought him down for Florida State last year, and they hung in for most of that first half. And then this year, obviously, the LSU game. He had a blast. He was chomping the whole time. I sent video of him doing the "Move Back, You Suck" chant to my wife. She was like, "What are you doing down there?" So a good time had by all. And honestly, we've talked all year about deposits and withdrawals and how Billy Napier's taken an awful lot of withdrawals from the Florida fan base. This was a giant, just enormous deposit with the fan base for not only beating a rival in LSU, but doing it in a way that was pretty emphatic there at the end. And then obviously with Lagway making the throw he did to put Florida ahead and sort of the hope that he brings. It was really sort of an amalgam of all the things I think we hope to see coming into the year. Now, obviously still have to do some stuff coming forward to get bowl eligible, to look competitive against Ole Miss, all that sort of stuff. But in a world where we've been talking about deposits and withdrawals, this was a giant deposit. Man, was it fun to be in the Swamp with that place rocking the way it was the other night. The fans, I mean, for as much talk as there's been about toxic fan bases and things like that, the tailgate scene, at least when I was walking over to the tailgate, was a little bit light compared to what it has been in the past. But man, the stadium was full, the stadium was rocking, and it was absolutely loud. And if I'm a recruit, I'm looking at that going, yeah, I can see myself down there on the field during this thing. So, sort of put the whole picture together for one night, and hopefully we can hold on to that. But, for one night, absolutely celebrating all night long, man.
Dave, what was your view of the game, man?
Yeah, man, I was actually got into the touchdown terrace. So it was a good little view there of the Lagway pass. Overall, it feels like throughout the last few years, every time that felt like we're about to get momentum as a program, something happened. Something went the wrong way. And so it finally feels like after some of the issues that we faced here and these last few years is that we got some momentum. And so you see it on the recruiting trail now. You see it, moving forward, hopefully that they can keep this thing going. And I think I was listening to Urban Meyer a little bit ago. He's on one of his podcasts. He was talking about how important momentum is for a successful football coach, how important momentum is for a program. You just can't lose it. And so right now I feel like for maybe the first time since maybe Utah, maybe it was Tennessee last year, like it feels like there's a lot of momentum and some wind at the sails of the Florida Gators. But man, it was loud in that fourth quarter when that sun went down and when We Are the Boys kicked on there and start the fourth quarter with some Tom Petty. That place went berserk. And I'll say this for Florida fans, whether it was the UCF game, whether it was the Kentucky game, whether it's this game, the fan base has been awesome in the stadium. And so I got to give props to the fan base, but it was a great night to be a Gator. That's for sure.
Yeah, look, I hate the time change, but one thing I do like about it is these late season games, and if it's a 3:30 kickoff, it still feels like a night game. You get the halftime, and it feels like a night game anyway because you get that atmosphere, as you said there. Look, that was one thing cool about the Tom Petty and the We Are the Boys. There was a sack on the last play of third down, so the fan base is already going nuts, and then you roll right into that. As you said, it's kind of carried over into the fourth quarter, and we saw a defensive line dominate a really good LSU offensive line and just keep hitting The LSU quarterback there, Nussmeier, over and over again, certainly made a difference there. And hey, going to your point, we'll probably hit it after our interview that we had planned for this, but we'll go into that a little bit. You've talked about the momentum, and Napier saying today he wants to see his team mature. He wants to see the maturity of this team moving forward. Big game with Ole Miss this week, certainly, and then FSU to finish up the season after that. So we'll get into that. Everybody hit that like button. Smash that like button right here on YouTube. Really, really helping us out here. Subscribe if you haven't done so yet. Why haven't you done so yet? But hey, I'll give you a little bit of grace. Do it right now, and all is good. Right here on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. Join Gators Breakdown Plus as well. Link is in the description to keep the conversation going on the Discord and the ad-free episodes of Gators Breakdown. And one more time, download the Autograph app. If you're a fair weather fan, you're not really, don't listen to this. But if you're a diehard, that I know you are, since you're right here on Gators Breakdown, then the Autograph app is here for you. Diehard Gator fans, you can earn big rewards by tuning into your favorite content, even more from Gators Breakdown, right there on the Autograph app. Every minute you spend keeping up with your favorite team earns you coins. Stack them up, cash them in for everything from signed jerseys or free tickets and more. There's a news feed to get you caught up on the day's news, a podcast feed so you can listen to Gators Breakdown right there, and other shows right in the app. So download Autograph now on the Google Play or the App Store using code Gators Breakdown. Link is in the description because real fans deserve more. All right, Dave, let's get to you. We were trying to plan this last week a bit, and that was coming on the heels of Florida announcing that Billy Napier would return and lead Florida forward in the, at least for 2025, and we'll see what 2025 holds. But the Scott Strickland announcing that, we're going to move forward with Billy Napier. And I mean, look, you keep looking at it, and we can debate all day on the on-field results of through 3 seasons. If that was enough to bring Billy Napier back, we've done that enough already. You can add to that if you want, but there's a lot away from the football field that helped play a role in this decision. And as you brought to my attention, of course, namely the House settlement with the NCAA, the $2.8 billion in back pay to former athletes, and the $20.5 million in revenue sharing due next year. There was, kind of seemed it wasn't just about the results on the field.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at an earthquake when it comes to college football, college athletics as a whole. There's so much uncertainty right now. And so I think that's part of the analysis that would come from not just the University of Florida, but would come from any of the major Power 4 programs that are out there, because there is an uncertainty that exists that, for lack of better words, there's a lot of money that's due upcoming, but also there's just no roadmap on how to move forward. And so, whether it is really this house settlement is the big deal. And I think what people should know about the house settlement is this is as big of a change as was the NIL change. And so everybody's still kind of thinking about this in just the NIL way. But and we've seen just crazy changes that have come to college football through NIL. This is kind of the next progression. And so, as you were kind of mentioning, we do some of the, of course, labor and employment law, done some NIL for some folks, but have been dealing with higher education as well. And across the board, no matter where you're looking at, there is a sense that level of uncertainty, that's going to be hard for anybody to move when it comes to football coaches, when it comes to, making any, big changes up front here, because there's so much at stake in making the right decisions. And so, I mean, you think about an additional expense ultimately that's coming for each and every one of these Power 4 schools that are going to enter into this house settlement. And maybe we can talk, you can ask me some questions here. We can kind of talk a little bit about that kind of get deeper into it. But that's a huge expense that's coming up. And so between that, the portal window that is there from closing really on December the 28th, I think it's the 9th to the 28th, signing day coming up soon after the last game here in early December, that first week of December. I mean, between the calendar and between this house settlement and what this could do, it's not shocking that a lot of folks are expecting that there not be one Power 4 football coach that'll be fired at the end of this season.
I mean, I guess, Dave, my question is, so Florida obviously has made its decision with Napier coming back in 2025. Certainly there's been some discussion about using some of those funds that they would have used for a buyout to front load some deals with guys who are coming in, whether it's through the portal or whether it's through the 2025 recruiting class. What's the advantage to doing that? But then also, is everybody else doing that? So like, is, Florida maybe keeping up with the Joneses, but are they actually finding an edge here? Because one of the things that Florida was pretty slow in terms of its embrace of NIL, and schools like Texas A&M were finding edges that Florida and quite honestly, even Alabama weren't finding early on. And that's one of the reasons why they had success on the recruiting trail. And so is this we need to keep up with everyone else, or is this we can actually position ourselves to take advantage of what's happening over and above what some other folks are doing by having that money allocated in a way that's not replacing a coach?
Yeah, I think that it depends on the school that you're talking about. Your SEC peers, that they're expected to be hitting this revenue sharing. And so that $20.5 million, the SEC, I think, your Big Ten, they want to see their schools being able to reach that initially. And so that's part of the settlement. And maybe I should back up a little bit and just be able to describe the House settlement is basically, it's an antitrust. I don't want to get too deep into it. It was an antitrust lawsuit from all of these student athletes in the past who said, why couldn't we get this NIL? Why couldn't we get the money and the access to those NIL funds that now these student athletes can get? And they're from a certain period of time that would be allowed by a statute of limitations. So instead of going all the way through trial and potentially paying out what they were saying could be upwards of $5, $6, $7 billion worth of damages, which could have been crippling to all of college sports, the NCAA and all of its members voted to engage in settlement talks and have this settlement, which is really, it's that $2.8 billion that we were talking about in what is sort of de facto like back wages for what could have been earned. You think about, right, like what could Tim Tebow have earned if he were in this modern day college football, and how much could have he been making in endorsement deals? It really is, the NCAA was saying that stuff was illegal. You couldn't do it. But now that the courts have said, no, that actually what you were doing was a violation of the law, there was these lawsuits that kept popping up, and they're going to probably keep coming in some respects. But part of that was changing the whole model that they're going to be using instead of this NIL model that we've been seeing, which is kind of a wild, wild west, a complete wild, wild west with a lot of these organizations that have popped up to help pay players, like we see it at both, whether it's the University of Florida or some of the other schools. Florida Victorious seems to be doing a great job, but I don't think that's the future that the schools see. And so the schools overall, whether it's the University of Florida, whether it's your SEC peers, they knew that that's not sustainable long term. And so this is kind of them getting ahead of it, using the legal aspects of things to get ahead of it and have this $20.5 million that's part of the settlement that they have to pay student athletes. And so, so to kind of get to your question, is it something that's going to get the University of Florida ahead of the curve? Probably not ahead of the curve of some of your peers, but could it keep the University of Florida from being behind the curve, having some stability? Potentially. I think that's the risk, right? When folks are looking at the risk situation, you don't have a coach, hypothetically, let's say if they had moved on from Billy after a Florida State game. You have signing day that's coming up. You then have that portal window. There's some names being thrown around for some folks who were potentially going to the playoff. Playoff doesn't even start till December the 20th, December 21st, December 22nd. So that person isn't even be entering into conversations with the University of Florida until they lose a football game in the playoff. And so maybe earliest you're having conversations in reality, like actual first party conversations, is December 23rd, Christmas Eve. And so the portal's about to close. And I think the key thing that to be thought about here is that there's a certain amount of money that has to be spent. So a lot of folks have been talking about what NIL looks like, or whether UF was keeping up with the NIL, or whether other schools were keeping up in the NIL, or whether schools like Ohio State were kind of, spending a lot more money, or Oregon, right? What this does is set a cap, but it's also the amount of money that you're supposed to share with the athletes. And that goes for all athletes at each of these institutions. But what it does is now is, I don't know how much University of Florida, with Florida Victorious, like how much they're spending at this point, but they're going to have to spend money later on. And if you don't have a football coach in December, how do you recruit student athletes to spend that money on at that point, especially with kind of the shortened window they're looking at in the spring? And so I think that had to have played a huge role in that. If we don't have a football coach put in place for December, and we're in a situation where we have money that we kind of need to spend to get to these house settlement numbers, which they're talking about, there's a lot of uncertainty. And I'm not going to tell you every school is going to do this the same way, but there's certain numbers. I think Ross Dellinger was talking about some in a recent article that he did that was outstanding. Somewhere around 75 to 80% of this $20.5 million will be applied to football. And then sort of from there, some basketball. There's going to be some Title IX issues that go with that. And then also, some of the Olympic sports. So there's some uncertainty. But if you didn't have a football coach in place, you're looking at a situation in which you may not be able to spend the money to be able to compete for next year. And then the question is, would a football coach even want to go to you at this point if they were unable to spend that money up front in the portal when the amount of athletes is going to be unparalleled to be able to sort of build their program for the upcoming year? So I know that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I think that's some of the analysis that had to be had at that point.
Dave, so what's the future of the sport look like in your eyes when dealing with this? Will coaches and fans get their wishes of some kind of roster stability moving forward now, when we're talking about all the settlements, and we know what the coaches would like? The coaches would love, hey, if we're going to go this new direction, can there be some stipulations to where, all right, we're going to give you this NIL deal, we're going to do this, and you know what, you got to be here 2, 3, 4 years. I don't know if there's going to be different kind of deals. If it's less money, is it less years? If it's more money, is it more years? Or is it going to be very blanket for everybody? Maybe from what you're hearing and all the research you've done, what does the future of the sport look like?
Well, there's definitely some uncertainty, but I think that's this house settlement's one thing, where what used to be those NIL funds potentially will end up kind of moving on to the books for the schools. And so, yeah, it'll be a more direct process. And if there are NIL deals, supposedly, we'll see if the NCAA enforces, how they enforce things, and how they maybe the conferences enforce this. But you're going to end up with NIL deals that are supposed to be market value, not pay for play. The pay for play is going to come from that revenue share. That is going to continue to go up too. You want to think about what is all driving this. It's that TV money. Folks are talking about through the remainder of this Disney, ABC, ESPN deal with the SEC, right? We're going to be reaching $100 million a year payouts to the schools. Same thing in the Big Ten at this point. The ACC is a lot less, but they're still going to be continuing to see rises in those funds as well. And so you're going to see more money being put into those revenue shares. But then a lot of this stuff's going to come down to, and I hate to say it, but it's going to come down to Congress and come down to whether some legislation can be put in place to sort of stop the antitrust side of things. But all the rumors are that there's some real momentum there. So could you see contracts that are multiple years in the future? Yeah. Could you see more of like a European football style where you're buying contracts from other schools? That's a potential as well. And I'm going to say not every school is doing the same thing at this point, but there are forms that are going out to through the conferences to schools. And so you could see multi-year contracts coming up. And that also may have kind of gone into the analysis that would be, are you going to fire your football coach this year, where you might be able to next year have a multi-year contract or a 2-year contract, or be able to hold your roster together if you fire a football coach in comparison to this year. That had to play into the analysis. I mean, you think about it, the Jags end up firing Peterson upcoming. All the guys don't just enter the transfer portal. They're all on contract. That next football coach comes in, he makes decisions. They can cut some guys, but some of the key pieces they end up maintaining. That's just not the case right now in college football. So the aspect of the potential that there could be some long-term deals that could be put into place throughout, eligibility, it had to weigh on the decision-making, not just of the University of Florida and the powers that be, but also why we're not seeing, and the rumors are not seeing many moves at all this upcoming year when it comes to football coaching.
That's fascinating to me if that ends up being the case. If we're a year from now and it just doesn't work out for whatever reason with Billy Napier, look, I hope a year from now we're saying, hey, that was the right move. DJ Lagway's winning a Heisman and we're getting ready for a playoff run here in mid-November. But if it doesn't, that would be fascinating to say, hey, well, long-term contracts, and now DJ Lagway's still going to be here in 2026. And, whoever's hired still gets to use him.
Right. And how much of a game changer is that at that point, right? The nucleus of it kind of reverts back to a little bit of what we would have seen a decade ago when you had, somebody had to sit out a year to transfer, or there was just a lot more. Heck, football coaches had to sign transfer packets to be able to allow the kids to transfer out. Those days are long gone. But now you might be saying, hey, well, we're going to pay you a certain amount of money over a couple of year period and make sure that you're here for that period of time. And again, like we talked about, a certain amount of money that they should and have to be spending upcoming in comparison to now, where some football programs, they may not be spending much at all, or overall the athletic programs. Now you have to be sharing this money with the athletes as long as this settlement gets the final seal of approval in May. So it's going to be a complete game changer to the way that things are done.
So I have two questions, and they're not completely related. But the first is, you've got the revenue sharing piece, but then if you think about like LeBron James in the NBA, he makes more money from Nike than he does from the Lakers. And one of the reasons he's able to move around and have year-to-year contracts is because his risk of injury is essentially nothing, because he's got a lifetime contract with Nike.
Right. If
you've got all the funds from the boosters lined up this year, and you've got this NIL money that's coming in, and you've got the revenue sharing money that's coming in that you have to spend, since money's fungible, I mean, technically, you could sign, say, Lagway from the NIL space, and you could have someone else on a revenue share deal from that space, and essentially double your pot by piling up that NIL money, right? The NIL process isn't necessarily going away, because I would look at it and I would say DJ Lagway is worth whatever people think he's worth in the open market. In terms of being able to hawk stuff in the city of Gainesville. My kid's asking for a jersey. If it's DJ Lagway, Max is into it. I think you can justify numbers that aren't necessarily pay for play. I mean, it's pay for play because he's worth that money because he's Florida's quarterback.
Right.
But he's actually worth that money in the open market. So can you game it? I'm always thinking, how do you actually find an edge over Georgia, or an edge over Alabama, or an edge over Ole Miss? And it feels like the buyout money that's sitting in a pot is an edge that Florida has. So irrespective of the change that might happen if you decide to make a change at coach, you now have an edge on the recruiting trail where Florida's been behind. And I'm wondering, is that part of the thinking, that you can sort of combine those pots in order to make sure your deal is sweeter than whatever other people are able to give?
So there is a potential, especially right now, before the settlement goes into place. You're kind of in this no man's land. And I think, again, that's part of what's going on right now is, if you're not spending the money, you have to spend the money later, but you do have the opportunity to spend even more money than what would be the revenue share later on if you front load that stuff. And so, you could pay DJ, you could pay another student athlete or somebody that you're trying to get out of the portal. And there could be some upfront payments that start there. And if you have additional monies, if you got folks that have contributed that, and said, hey, instead of moving on and having to pay that $13 million up front and then paying the rest of this buyout for what would be around $26-27 million later on, let's just front load it. Let's put a bunch of money into this thing, and then we'll figure out how we move some of this off of those books, those NIL books, and then onto the what would be more of a legitimate the schools books at that point. Then that could certainly be done, and then be able to get some guys on the roster, front load some of that money, and that's something that has been discussed as well. As for what you're talking about too, is there's certain programs that just carry certain cachet, right? And so we all see the Gatorade commercials, or what DJ Lagway on that Gatorade commercial this past year, from being the Gatorade Player of the Year. We see, I mean, University of Florida, the flagship institution in the state of Florida. Part of that is that, whoever you are, if you end up the starting quarterback at the University of Florida, there's a certain amount of cachet that goes along with that. But if you do well as the starting quarterback at the University of Florida, part of that is that hopefully in the future, UF, and this goes for all these SEC programs, this goes for a lot of these, the Ohio States of the world, the Michigans of the world. If you're those types of schools, those types of programs with those massive brands, you're going to be able to connect student athletes with big brands, big corporations, who they can get fair market value out of. And ultimately your quarterbacks, and I think that was the original vision of NIL, right? Was that, the Trevor Lawrences of the world would be making a lot of money, in their freshman, sophomore years, legitimately, because Gatorade would want to sign them, or Nike would want to cut that deal with them, and lock them up. And you would see these big brands, swoop in, Dr. Pepper, like we're seeing. And so there's a real opportunity if you can connect kids with these entities and have those relationships. Jordan Brand, like what you have been involved with now for almost a decade at this point. These are brands that they have relationships with, and so there's real opportunity to be able to connect them with that, and then see what can happen. Now, is it going to be competitive? Heck yeah, but there's real opportunity to do that and to get an advantage there to attract talent.
So I do have one more question, which is, we've sort of talked about the positive aspects of this, and there's certainly risk with making a change, but there's also risk with not making a change. And you've talked about the uncertainty leading these schools to maybe be more risk averse. There's an opportunity to zag or get an edge by making a change in an uncertain environment.
Yeah.
And I look at this and I say, I understand that you have this revenue sharing settlement coming, but I think where this ends up, you sort of alluded to it in terms of Congress getting involved and stuff like that, is this is eventually going to end up as players being employees. And there's an uncertain cost associated with that. We talk about workers' compensation, we talk about benefits, you talk about all that sort of stuff. So if you kick the can down the road from an uncertainty perspective now, are we going to get to use the uncertainty excuse as we have 6 and 6 seasons for the next 6 years because we don't want to have to change the coach? Because if we change the coach, we won't be able to bring in the players. And then a year later, we have to have the same conversation where we're saying, well, I know we went 6 and 6 again, but we might have to, there's uncertainty in the marketplace. Like, at what point does and this is maybe more of a question for us, Dave, but I mean, to me, that's the thing, is that there has been uncertainty in the college football landscape throughout all of Billy Napier's tenure, and Florida has been slow to adjust throughout all of Billy Napier's tenure to bring in players. And so now what I'm hearing is we're going to be slow to adjust our approach because we're afraid of what might be coming on the back end. And my point is this is not going to change. Like, this is not going to be stable until we have like a full collectively bargained agreement between an antitrust exempt sport, its players, and its management. And we're probably a decade away from having that be the end result. And so there is a risk associated with holding on. And I'm just curious, I mean, is that completely off base, thinking that the landscape is going to change beyond just this revenue share, and that you kind of have to roll with that change and make sure you got the right people on the bus the whole way through? And look, whether Napier is or isn't the right guy is a different question than do you make a change just because and say to heck with the change, to heck with the risk of making the change. There's a risk to not making a change as well.
And Dave, before you go and maybe you could tie this into it, would there be a quote unquote, maybe this is another way of looking at it, but just next year window, 2-year window for DJ Lagway, is there somewhat of an all-in approach to build around him, but big picture still be, I guess, tentative, if that's maybe the right way to put it, go in the wheels part?
I can't see a world right now where you wouldn't want to build around DJ Lagway, right? And so if there's a threat of losing him, and I guess nobody knows that, right? We don't know that. Nobody can answer exactly what that is. And so you have this momentum that's building. So to start with, I'll start with your question, Dave, is that if you have the opportunity to build around DJ, and as we talked about, if you didn't have a coach right now, then there would potentially be a risk of there being really like an all open moment where the Florida Gator roster is just picked clean, right? I mean, that's a real risk if you didn't have a coach during December too. And then if DJ were to make some decisions, and ultimately they're making business decisions, these are also 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. They have loyalty to certain people. I mean, it seems like DJ is a very mature young man who has a good head on his shoulders, a great family, and wants to be a Gator, and you could see that. I mean, even when we were in for that Florida Georgia game, and that crowd was chanting his name, you could see it all over his face, man. He appreciated that, and he wanted to be out there so bad. And I think that there's something to that, but there's just, you never know. And Billy clearly has a great relationship with DJ, and if you didn't have Billy, you keep DJ, do you end up in a situation where, like we talked about, you have money that you're supposed to spend too, and getting up to a certain threshold that's probably higher than the threshold right now that's being spent on a roster, and you don't even have the opportunity, both trying to keep your own players but not able to go get guys to build around. So yeah, if you have momentum, it's kind of like from the beginning what we were talking about. If you have momentum right now and you can find a way to, play with Ole Miss this week on national television and look competent and DJ show out again, and then you go to Tallahassee and you put it on the Seminoles, right, again on national TV in prime time on ESPN2, and you get bowl eligible, and then you find a way to get to a bowl game, and for maybe the first time in the Napier era, you got a ton of momentum going into that, and DJ shines out again. He could be if you think about next year, who's coming back when it comes to quarterback play? Who is there in the SEC that's coming back? Heck, there's been terrible quarterback play through most of the SEC this season. So who is it?
Man, I had that exact conversation at work today.
Right.
And your top three next year have to be DJ,
right,
Norris Sellers, and Nico.
Right. Yeah, and as we've seen, Nico has not been necessarily excelling the way that Tennessee was hoping that he would. So, I mean, there's a certain amount of momentum that then you can use to recruit. And if you have the money that you have to spend as part of what's going to be this house settlement, and as Will was saying, if you have certain boosters who say, man, actually, instead of then applying another $13 million here, let's go spend additional money up front, though, and hit the transfer portal, go maybe get a few more guys that were some 5 stars, get them to visit, get them on campus, and maybe throw some maybe overpay a little bit for some of these guys up front. Maybe you get so much momentum that for the first time, you truly can put a roster together that not only can compete on a week in and week out basis, but can potentially compete for championships with a guy, if you really believe that he's special and you really believe he's number one pick level type, generational player here at the University of Florida, then it's hard to cut it loose. But in the same way that we were talking about that, Will, no, you're 100% right. There's of course risk in, what if things go sour next year and there's issues there. I'll say this. I think that that there's going to be some uncertainty upcoming. This is, I think, the biggest move that's coming in the near future. There could be an employment change, right? Like you were talking about. That is something that I think that the NCAA would like to avoid with every ounce.
As long as they can.
Right. And so there's been cases that some Justice Kavanaugh during the Alston case kind of signal that he was buying into this idea that maybe there was some legitimacy to the employment. There's been NLRB, National Labor Relations Board, has been making some decisions in regard to the employment issue. So yeah, no, that could be it. And there could be collective bargaining that's discussed. They want to avoid that though. They want to avoid, if they can, they're going to try to avoid unions. They're going to try to avoid collective bargaining in that way. But those uncertainties could be coming. But I think that this type of jump where money is directly coming from the schools, that's a 20.5 revenue, that revenue share, which is, this is what the NFL does. This is what the NBA does. This is that revenue share model that they're always collectively bargaining anyway. So this is such a huge change this upcoming year that, it's hard, even if they became employees, then there would be, different contracts, different aspects that would change the analysis on that stuff. For football, it's not going to change that much with the revenue share. For your other sports, then it's going to become a lot more difficult. And there's a lot of doomsday scenarios for some other sports. And this whole settlement too ends caps on scholarships. So that's another thing to think about. Caps on scholarships are gone. So there used to be caps on baseball. There used to be caps on gymnastics. There used to be caps on the rest of these sports. So it ends that. But could there be some risk where things are changing very rapidly? And could you keep kicking the ball down the field and say, nah, we're not going to deal with this now? Sure. And there's certainly risk that fans are not going to buy in. And, if we had gotten blown out on Saturday, if the Gators then went and got blown out by Ole Miss and then found a way to go lose in Tallahassee, I can tell you that there would be a lot of different analysis maybe from those who are in decision-making positions. Maybe because it just, you lose buy-in with folks, just even just your not just your boosters, but losing buy-in from your fans. So no, I think you're right that there could be that potential, but I think this is such a massive change. And I'll tell you this too. I mean, there's rumors floating around that schools are not going to be able to reach this level of 20.5 million. They're going to ask for grace periods. But if you're the University of Florida and you're these SEC programs that have this type of cash, applying it to that $20.5 million, that's going to be for all athletes, but whatever you're spending on football. And then you got that NIL money that Willie, that you were trying to talk about. Maybe you start pouring some of that in right now and sort of front load that. There's some real opportunities to be had with a DJ Lagway that if you went the other way, maybe it doesn't exist. Man, ultimately, it feels like hiring the right football coach is tough business. And so there's no foolproof. I mean, look at Brian Kelly, right? I mean, he was supposed to be some slam dunk hire. Lincoln Riley's supposed to be a slam dunk hire at the same time. This is a difficult business to be in and make decisions on. I think ultimately, Will, if this were 10 years ago, this probably isn't the conversation we're having right now with Billy Napier. But we're not 10 years ago anymore. So we're in a situation where they got to spend money, and they're going to spend money on a roster, and they need a football coach to spend money on a roster for. And if they don't have a football coach in December, then they're going to have different issues that we've never dealt with before. So there's we'll say there's certainly risk. There's some reward there for that aspect, but there's always going to be situations where hindsight's always 20/20. So we'll see what we're talking about in a few, maybe this time next year, of how this went.
So, David, basically, though, in a lot of ways, the economics of keeping Billy Napier makes some sense.
I think the economics of keeping Billy Napier at this point, if you don't have a football coach in mind to hire on December the 1st, or at least pretty close after that game is over against Florida State, and there's not consensus there, you'd be hard pressed to go spend that $13 million, not apply some of it to that NIL up front, and then make sure that you're up at that $16 million, what'll be basically a salary of all these guys next year, and be able to recruit guys out of the portal. And if you didn't have somebody there, yeah, I mean, the economics, you might end up with, we've thought we've been seeing some difficult football over the last few years. It might be even more difficult next year. And then the question is, could you get somebody who would want to come in without the access to the portal, with only having sort of their own players wherever they're coming from accessible to them, could you even get somebody that's quality to come do that? And I think that's a big unknown too. So yeah, I think ultimately, if you're Florida, the economics make some sense to do this, especially I'd say Scott Strickland was the happiest person in the swamp on Saturday too.
I don't know if he's happier than Max, but we'll give it to him.
Max might have had him beat, but there were probably only a handful of people maybe in the swamp that were happier than Scott Strickland watching that football game.
Anything else, Will?
Nah, Dave, thanks. I mean, I could talk about this forever, but it's but I just keep like needling for little edges. So I'm sure we'll carry on behind the scenes, but really appreciate your time.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to discuss with this this LSU game next week at Ole Miss, but once we get into the off season, you guys have me back on. We'll keep talking about it and trying to kind of see where things stand.
Yeah, for sure. This is definitely, when you and I talked last week, I was like, this has got to be out there of a different way of looking at it. Of course, we all have done it on Twitter. We've done it here on Gators Breakdown. We've talked about the on the field and how that's not good enough in so many ways, but wanted to give a different side of it, try to be fair as much as we can, and really give a different side of why this may have played out the way it played out.
I mean, we need a winning season at the University of Florida. I was talking to the guys who are seniors right in their fourth year right now this weekend, some guys and they've never seen a winning season at the University of Florida. And that is not acceptable, right? I mean, that is not acceptable between what we've seen. But hopefully we're going to get some momentum here and times are changing. So hopefully they are on the cutting edge and thinking through this stuff, and we'll see some success upcoming.
Good stuff. Dave, man, good. You hang around if you want, but I understood. We talked about 20 or 30 minutes, but that's up to you if you want to stick around or not.
I'll hang around for a little bit more and talk some football.
All right, hey, sounds good. So let's move forward. Billy Napier did have his Monday press conference today, of course, after LSU. Ole Miss coming up so he's going to start looking forward, but he wants to see some maturity from his team.
Obviously, a good Ole Miss team coming into town, and a lot at stake. So the big thing for us is we have to earn the right to win, and I think that's got to be the approach each day of the week. I thought we wanted to be the most prepared we have been to play last week. That was the big message and challenge, and I think we were. So this week it's all about earning the right to win, and we have to have a little bit of a playoff mindset ourselves to some degree. Can we handle, the praise, the positive? Obviously played well Saturday and get a lot of gratification from that. But I think it's important that we hit the reset button here, and it's about the next challenge. You're either growing or you're dying. You're either getting better or you're getting worse. So our attitude and our approach towards meetings and practice and our self-discipline, our routine this week will be really critical. I would like to see some maturity from our team. Can we handle, this group has been able to ignore the noise. Can we sort through the hype a little bit, and stay consistent in the way we prepare, our practice habits, our self-discipline, our film review. Because then I think long-term as a program to go where we want to go, we're going to have to navigate that week in and week out, right? So this league in a playoff format will challenge that, so not only physically turning it around and being ready to play, but mentally, new set of variables, new personnel, new plan, and then emotionally, you got to sort through that too, right? So are we mature enough to handle all the praise, and can we turn it around and do it again?
Yeah, hasn't been much praise for the Gators this year. And, of course, now coming off the biggest win this season, a lot of people want to say this was the biggest win in Napier's career. Utah game one, still the bigger one to me, given what that team ended up being. But you can see it where it probably is Billy Napier's biggest win in a lot of ways, just because of finally getting that vote of confidence, but still so many questions. And, look, one win doesn't fix all the issues, and, it's automatically – everything's A-okay right now. Moving forward to Ole Miss, they want to win. We want to win as fans, but look, Ole Miss is a pretty darn good team. You know, if Florida goes out there and loses Saturday, it doesn't mean Florida hasn't matured. It doesn't mean Florida can't build on momentum. I mean, look, LSU's a really good team. It's going to be hard to walk out of the swamp with a victory, but it's also a little bit different. You know, this week, you're getting some praise, but I don't think many people are going to be giving Florida the same chance against Ole Miss as there were people giving Florida a lot of credit to do something against LSU last week. So it's a little bit different this week. Early in the week, you know, I was listening to different podcasts and SEC Network Radio, listening and watching Chris Doering, you know, troll Peter Burns all day, making him dress up as a Gator band member for the first time that he's been able to have Peter Burns kind of look ridiculous on TV for picking LSU and their bet that they have every year. So Florida's getting a lot of praise sung early this week, but I think it's only going to last a little bit, Will, because Ole Miss is coming up, and I think when you start looking at it, okay, yeah, you know this one's going to be tough. But to me, it's not going to mean if Florida walks, you know, you don't want to go lose 40-10. But if Florida goes out there, and look, this isn't moral victory time, but if Florida goes out there and fights hard, you know, the word maturity, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, well, they couldn't live up to the hype of, you know, the reason they lost this game was because they won last week and they weren't ready to play this week. Ole Miss just might be better than Florida, and that's really all it's going to mean.
Not might be, is. Like, so they're second overall in yards per play gained on offense. They're fifth overall in yards per play allowed on defense. You look at EPA differential on so offense minus defense subtraction. They're the best team in the SEC, even though they've had 2 losses. Now, look, they did lose to this LSU team. They did also lose to a Kentucky team. I think when we talk about keeping momentum, it's a good thing Florida's not playing Kentucky. The last 2 times Florida's had real momentum. After the win against Utah, they went out and laid an egg against Kentucky the next week. And after the win against Tennessee last year, they had a sort of lackluster performance against Charlotte, and then went out and laid an egg against Kentucky the week after. So maybe it's a good thing that we're not playing the Wildcats this week. But look, this is an enormous challenge for Billy Napier. It's an enormous challenge for the team. I will say that I do think this win is the biggest win in Billy Napier's tenure at Florida. And the reason why is Florida whipped them. Florida averaged 7.9 yards per play. LSU averaged 4.3. Third down conversions, for the most part, are a mirage. Now, some of it is what Florida was doing on defense. They were dropping a little bit deeper in their zones than I'd like to see. But that was clearly the game plan. The game plan was make LSU dink and dunk down the field, and we think they're going to make mistakes, and we're going to protect against the big plays. And if we do that, we'll be okay. Now, there were a few times where probably they should have gotten off the field, would have changed the time of possession a little bit more. And to be honest, if they'd gotten 3 more possessions for DJ Lagway in the offense, I think they would have scored 39 points. That's why I think it's such a big deal, because we've been talking, like Anthony Richardson in year 1 against Utah looked awesome, but he was never the long-term answer at quarterback. And we knew that because we knew he was either going to the NFL after year 1 or potentially year 2. The win against Tennessee last year was nice, but again, even the people who were the Mertz supporters, and I was not one of them, there was a recognition that Mertz was not bringing Florida to a championship level. I think what we saw the other day is that DJ Lagway has the opportunity to raise Florida's floor to, like, I mean, we're talking like 8-9 wins as like the baseline expectation, with an opportunity with the right moves and the right personnel and a few things going Florida's way to be competing for a playoff berth. And so to me, like, establishing that Lagway, while injured, he didn't even really play that well. Like he still played great, but he didn't play well for DJ Lagway. Like, he was way better against Kentucky than he was the other day against LSU. There were some throws that he left out there, but you can see him starting. And I think I even texted you during the game, Dave, you can see him starting to figure out what to do when the defense doesn't give him a simple look pre-snap that he can exploit. But the minute LSU gave him man-to-man coverage, bam. Like, he knows where to go with the ball the minute you give him man-to-man coverage and you decide to blitz. He's almost unblitzable at this point, because you're going to give the risk of giving up a 40-yard gain is probably worth more than the reward of getting him into the ground. I think you're going to see teams like Ole Miss and teams like even Florida State play a ton of zone to just keep him keep him in front of them from here on out. The
game-winning drive, 3 plays, but the middle play was the pass to Hansen. And, we had talked about tight ends last week and had to get him involved. LSU brings a ton of pressure. Simple. Boom. There you go.
I'll tell you the most impressive play in all of it, and I still haven't posted my post-game recap because I've been sleeping and recovering from the travel. But the most impressive play for me in the entire game was LSU showed a single high look and they rotated into a 2 high look with zone underneath, and he saw it and he checked it down to Jacoby Jackson, who then ran to the 17, and they happened to have a holding penalty on the play. But that shows a progression that DJ Lagway was not doing against A&M, was not doing against Miami, and quite honestly wasn't even really doing against Kentucky. It's just Kentucky is stupid and played cover 3 the entire game, and he just drilled seams down. He drilled the seam route like over and over and over and over again against him. LSU was trying to do some stuff post-snap, and you can see him processing it. That ball to Jackson still got out a little bit late, and so, that's going to start to speed up as he goes. So I look at this and I go, this is probably an injured DJ Lagway while still learning how to process when defenses are doing stuff post-snap, is still a guy with a QB rating of like 145, and my stat yards above replacement is 0.98. So we're talking like Jake Fromm is kind of where that sits. That's like the floor of the kid. Because I honestly didn't think he played that well. Some of that is expectations. Because we time right down the sideline. You're like, oh, well, that's just what he does. But still,
and go to this comment from a YouTube comment in here. Will Miles' impression: Gators win, but if LSU catches those interceptions, we're having a different conversation.
I have such a reputation. I really do.
But Jason Yulee does say, giving you a hard time. Go Gators. And you're the star here. The real Army Sniper also says, anyone else patiently waiting for Will's take of the LSU game and the outlook for?
Well, I was just boring everybody. They were waiting for the real show here.
I don't know. You were there, Dave. Like, what did you think about? Every time Lagway threw the ball to the outside, I was like, up, completion. Like he missed one to Badger. I think it was like late in the third quarter. And Badger kind of tripped on his own feet as he was going back that direction. And he missed one to DK where the DB actually grabbed DK's arm and wouldn't let it go. And it should have been a pass interference call.
Yeah. I kind of felt like, and I'm sorry to jump in real quick, but I kind of felt like watching it. DJ was sailing some early too. It looked like kind of the hamstring issue. Potentially he was even trying to get used to the feel of things in there. And so, ultimately, DJ has an ability to see the field at this point that it's hard for a true freshman, even think about true freshmen that have had that ability to do that. And so, ultimately, it seems like if we get a Lagway that looks like this, even moving forward, where maybe he didn't play the best, like you're saying, Will, but he has the ability to continue to mature and continue to grow into next week and see defenses begin to see things slow down. You could get an even more explosive as that hamstring gets better, and even more explosive DJ Lagway that could maybe do some things even against an Ole Miss.
There were probably 4 or 5 plays where he handed the ball off to his running back, and he had the back end wide open. And there was one I can't remember. I think it was in the second half you could see him. He turned towards me and my son because we were in the end zone, and you could just see him going, damn it, I wish I could keep the ball, because he just saw this giant opening on the backside. He knows he's not allowed to do it, and he knows it's bad for him to do it, but like the competitor in him has him doing it. Now, I will say,
but it does make you wonder too, would it even be there if it wasn't for his hamstring injury? Maybe LSU was just like, you know what, screw it. If you do just happen to keep it this one time, we'll give it to you.
But that then opens up the running game, and lost. There was a lot of talk. I saw a lot of chatter on Twitter during the game about Florida not running the ball very much. But the reality is they had a 20-yard run by Jacoby Jackson on the first drive. They had the 55-yard run to Baugh. Other than that, they had 15 rushes for, what is that, like 35 yards? So on the other 15, they weren't going anywhere, right? So they popped a couple, but holding that guy on the edge, on the backside, really helps your running game. And we've even seen this, like statistically, when Mertz has been in there, Florida's running game has been much less effective than when Lagway's been in there, because he's able to hold them. Now, all that being said, Dave, because it's me, I still, our listener did mention the 2 potential interceptions that Lagway threw. The first one was egregious. That one absolutely should have been picked. The other thing, and this has been a hallmark of Billy Napier Billy Napier coached teams. The DK fumble on the punt return could have been absolutely disastrous because 3 plays later, Florida's scoring a touchdown. You had, after the first drive of the game where they get the 4th down stop, they're in LSU territory. 3 plays, -7 yards. They have a holding penalty and a false start. After the Banks fumble recovery, they're at the LSU 34. They have a false start, incomplete, loss of 3, incomplete, and they have to punt. So, like, there are definitive signs that this team has the ability to do more. I still, though, look at it and say Lagway's explosives, at some point, the inconsistency will catch up to him. Now, I think a year or 2 from now, that inconsistency starts to go away, and those incompletions are completions. You don't get the delays of game, those sorts of things. But this is the thing that concerns me the most about all of this stuff, is that DJ Lagway is essentially outplaying the mistakes that Graham Mertz and Aiden Warner could not outplay. And I would like to see those mistakes get buttoned up. Like, overall, like, if you talked about off-season progression and what we want to see, like, that to me, because you're not beating Ole Miss, giving up 2 scoring opportunities in Ole Miss territory with no points and punting it back to Jackson Dart. You're not beating Ole Miss, giving up, 3rd and 18 on a draw right up the middle, deep in their own territory, turns into a first down. Like, because Dart's going to hit some of those deep shots. Dart's going to hit some of those explosive plays. And that's the challenge. I mean, the challenge is I think Florida played really, really well against LSU, but I don't think really, really well is going to get the job done against Ole Miss. I think they have to be flawless. And I have yet to see a Billy Napier team be flawless in any game for 4 quarters in 3 years. The closest you could say is the first half against Tennessee last year. That's it. Yep. And in the second half, it wasn't flawless. And you might be able to say the same thing about Central Florida this year in the first half. And in the second half, it wasn't flawless. They need 4 quarters of absolutely flawless play. You can't be getting false starts on your home field. Like, you just can't. You can't have illegal formation. You can't have all that sort of stuff. So those are the things.
Anyway. And Dave, that's where I was going to go with you. To me, that's what maturity looks like. When Billy Napier talks about maturity, that's what it looks like. When you got the opportunity, don't step on your own foot. Don't throw a pick or don't throw a ball that might be picked and ruin a drive. That, to me, that's what the maturity looks like. You do those things, you'll go play a good game versus Ole Miss. You probably still lose anyway, but you give yourself a chance. Don't step on your own foot and not give yourself a chance. That's what maturity looks like to me against Ole Miss. And then in 2 weeks, maturity looks like going out there and beating Florida State 50-9.
I think that's what everybody wants to see, right? Is a well-coached football team that shows up, that knows their assignments, that knows what they're supposed to do, and executes, right? And so we've heard a lot of the head football coach talking about how he needed to execute better. But there's a certain point where you either need to execute in big situations or you don't. And so, this is another one of those big situations where we have a home crowd that, even though it's a noon game, hopefully it'll be pretty raucous and ready to go, and folks will get there a little earlier and get going at your tailgate a little bit earlier, and we'll see some real success. But I'll tell you, I think DJ is great, has played well. Man, the defense has been just the thing. Watching them, it's what's been missing from this whole tenure for Billy Napier. Was guys that are running around and hitting hard. And it's the culture, it's the mentality. And I think that's maybe I'm beating you to the punch here, but that's the thing that was watching that game at LSU, that you sat there and you were like, okay, this is Florida football. This is the Florida football we've been missing. Yeah.
And I wonder, not to try and, criticize here, what performance are we going to get? 2 games ago against Texas, we couldn't get to the quarterback to save our lives. And then this game against one of the best offensive linemen in the country, one of the best offensive line groups in the country, who'd given up 6 sacks all year, fought to get 7 in this game. So 2 games ago, you couldn't get anything. A game ago, you got everything you could have asked for from a defensive front. So, a little more consistency. I think that's what look, going against LSU, good luck getting 7 sacks again this week versus LSU. But it does give you a little bit of inclination that, hey, this is what you are capable of. As we go and try to finish this season out on a high point, let's get a little bit more consistency and see if we can see just a bit of what we saw Saturday night against, in the second half versus LSU.
Well, I mean, look, Florida's defense is still 72nd overall in the country in terms of yards per play allowed. So while I'm impressed with the performance against LSU, I'm not ready to say that they're fully loaded to come and take on this Ole Miss team. We'll see what they can do against guys like Cam Ward. They've struggled against guys like Brock Vandegrift. They've played very well. And we talked about it coming into this game. Garrett Nussmeier had really struggled over the last 4 or 5 games, basically had a QB rating of around 110. And what was he against Florida? 110.9. So Florida held Nussmeier to almost exactly what he had been doing over the last 4 or 5 games, which, hey, that's still a major improvement given that Florida's made guys who've looked sort of poor look like Heisman contenders throughout the last 3, 4, 5 years. However, I think there's a huge upgrade from Garrett Nussmeier to Jackson Dart. And one of the reasons I actually picked Florida in the LSU game is I looked at it and I said, I think Lagway's special, and I think Lagway is a major, major upside over Nussmeier. I can't say that about the Ole Miss game. I think Lagway may play great, but I don't think he's like if you asked me for this one game, do I want DJ Lagway or Jackson Dart? It's not a quick, oh yeah, I want DJ Lagway. I mean, I might choose him when doing the full evaluation, but it's not something where it's a no-brainer. Whereas Nussmeier versus Lagway, it's a no-brainer. I think you go back to the Texas game, Quinn Ewers, okay, he struggled a little bit this year, but that's a guy who led the team to the playoff last year. Like that's a full-throated SEC quality quarterback, and he tore up Florida's defense. Carson Beck, same thing. Even struggled in the first half, but without the turnovers, Florida was giving up a lot of yardage to Georgia, and eventually in the second half, the defense sort of broke. Nussmeier wasn't good enough to make the Florida defense break, at least not in the way some of those other guys did. And so that's the challenge to me if I'm Billy Napier, if I'm Ron Roberts, if I'm Austin Armstrong is, okay, we didn't break against a lesser quarterback, but now we have to show that we're not going to break against a superior quarterback, and we'll see if they're able to do it. I have my doubts, but that is the next step. I mean, the next step is you got to show that you can do it against a team that has. I mean, look, Ole Miss, I don't think has more talent on the lines overall than Florida does. I think you could argue they've been better coached, and I think you can argue that the quarterback has more experience. But I think overall, you go position by position, there's nobody from a recruiting ranking perspective who's that much better than Florida's guys. So this to me is completely, have the guys built up enough confidence to be able to be aggressive and go after this? And then, are they going to get some turnovers? Because I think they're going to have to turn over Dart the same way they did Beck. And if they can't get that to happen, then it's going to be a long day.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Like I said, noon in the swamp. Last home game of the year. Man, it's flies by.
Well, let me ask you this: what do you see a weakness that Ole Miss has at this point? It seems like their offensive line has struggled at times this year to protect Dart. He's had some injuries and now got that ankle. Is it their offensive line that's a little bit suspect that maybe can be taken advantage of here?
I mean, I think so. I haven't done my deep dive when it comes to Ole Miss yet. I think any team that loses to Kentucky and any team that loses to this LSU team certainly can be had. And I think that's kind of the lesson of the SEC this year is that there's nobody who's just like absolutely fantastic. And again, LSU kept Dart to a QB rating of 117. Kentucky had him at 160. But you look at everything else, he's like 272, 222, 183, 210, 140 against South Carolina, which was a reasonably close game, but then 171 against Arkansas or against Oklahoma, 284 against Arkansas, and then 141 against Georgia. So the answer
what was his QB rating of South Carolina? They beat the crap out of South Carolina. His QB rating was that low?
South Carolina game, it was 141, which
they got out to an early lead on that.
Yeah. They got a big lead.
Like a punt. Yeah, there was a fake punt, and they ended up getting the ball.
So I would have to go back and look at his rushing numbers in those games. I bet you that if you look at the rushing numbers, there you go. Kentucky 13 for 22, and LSU 15 for 27. He's getting sacked, he's getting flushed, and he's running the ball. So yes, to your point, Dave, I think absolutely the offensive line is going to be the determining factor. We'll see. I mean, it was interesting. You look at PFF, and Banks was not the best player on Florida from a play-to-play perspective. But when it came time to make a big play against LSU, Banks was the best player on the field. And so that to me is we've talked about this all year, is that the problem with Florida's defense over the past 3 years is there hasn't been anybody who can win a one-on-one matchup. And Caleb Banks won a bunch of one-on-one matchups on third down. He caused a second down fumble on Nussmeier that pinned him deep. He obviously, tracks down the offensive lineman for LSU after the fumble for Nussmeier, causes him to fumble and picks up the ball. But just he was flushing Nussmeier forward into guys like George Gums, into guys like TJ Searcy pretty much the entire night.
When's the last time we had an interior pressure like that? Like you and I, Will, we talked about the defense last week, and it was Zuniga and Grenard and Ja'Kai Polite, and you start looking at defensive ends. I can't remember the last time we've had interior pressure like that over all night long.
Consistently, Sharif Floyd.
Yeah, it has to be that long. Yeah.
Damien Easley.
Yeah. I mean, God, I'm not sure I had any kids when Sharif Floyd was playing there.
No,
16 years, maybe.
Bernie Waters brings up Jervon Dexter, but what I'm saying is not a game like this.
No, Dexter was not a consistent just disruptor in the middle. We always kind of hoped he would be, and he would be okay from time to time, certainly flashed. But, I think you said the same thing about Banks. Like, it hasn't been this way the entire year, right? It's just this one game. He was a monster. But it is sort of a – so we talk about Lagway and the big plays, right? And Lagway's inconsistent in short and intermediate routes. There's no other way to say it. He's inconsistent on those. But when it comes time for a deep shot and he gets the opportunity to hit it, he hits it. And so I think from an interior lineman perspective, okay, if Banks gets pushed back a little bit and all of a sudden, it's a 3-yard gain instead of a tackle for loss, over time that starts to build up. But what I want to see from that guy is the explosive play on 3rd and 5, where all of a sudden Jackson Dart's getting flushed from the pocket and doesn't have an opportunity to set his feet, not because Florida's blitzing, but because Florida has collapsed the pocket because of the guy in the middle. And if you make enough explosive plays on defense at the defensive line, you can make the quarterback really uncomfortable, even if you're not explosive on a play-to-play basis. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing in the PFF rankings. Is there's a recognition that he played pretty well, but on a play-to-play basis, he wasn't a difference maker. But when it came time where Florida needed an explosive, needed something big, he was getting off the ball and he was driving the center and the guard back into the quarterback's face to a point where Nussmeier had to know where he was every time he took a snap. And that was the other thing we said last week, Dave, is who's the guy you game plan against? Mm-hmm. Who's the guy you go, where is that guy lining up? And the other day it was Banks, and Florida has not had a guy like that who you've had to game plan for or figure out what to do or chip or, make sure you've got a double team on him, which then frees up somebody else to come around the edge or frees up a linebacker to come through. We talked about the Georgia game where they had Des Watson in the center taking up 2 guys and then the linebackers running off the edge of Big Des and freeing them up that way. Well, now if you got to do that, if you bring Des and Banks in there and you got to double team both the guys on the inside, LJ McCray, TJ Searcy, George Gums all of a sudden have one-on-one matchups on the outside. So, I think
we saw Tyreek Sapp have a benefit of that.
Sapp played really well too. I mean, look, I think the defense overall played very, very well when it wasn't 3rd down. And so there's some stuff to clean up there, especially with some of the drops that the linebackers were taking. But the fact that Pup Howard wasn't in there, I do think has an impact in terms of where the linebackers were, and they'll clean some of that up, I think. But yeah, I mean, I think, Dave, that's going to be the question. And looking at those rushing numbers, really interesting that in the games where LSU struggled, Darts had 15 rushing attempts, which means they're putting him down in the backfield quite a bit. So interesting.
All right. I knew this was going to be a loaded episode. We still got some recruiting to talk about. So, you hanging around, Dave, for that too, or?
Sure, why not?
There we go.
A whole episode here.
Yeah, there we go. All right, so let's continue with Billy Napier. And hey, look, second week in a row, he's talking about recruiting during the season. It can happen. It can happen. So. Here's Billy Napier on recruiting, like going back to just how big of a weekend this was. Florida, LSU, ton of recruits right here in the Swamp.
What type of weekend does that do for recruiting momentum, and what do you feel like that could carry into this last few weeks?
Yeah, winning helps recruiting. That's what I would tell you. So I think for us, that game day environment, seeing players produce, seeing players improve, I think it just it's a final piece of your product. I think we've worked on all the other parts of the player experience here. I think it's second to none. And I think seeing players improve and develop and grow into guys that can be some of the better players in the country at their position and have future NFL careers, that's important. Winning's important. And then just having a seat in that swamp when it's on fire like it was Saturday night, I think that's important as well.
Lo and behold, winning matters. I mean, yeah. I mean, surprise, surprise. I'm glad to hear the head man say that, because everybody will say, "Oh, recruiting's nothing but money now." No, wins and losses still matter. And when you're in that environment, as we have all discussed so far, what an exciting environment that was Saturday night. It paid off. But look, I talked about it on the game recap there, and we'll get into some recruiting news here and the guys that were there. But especially with DJ Lagway at quarterback and you're a wide receiver, how is it hard? It's got to be hard not to imagine yourself on the receiving ends of all those deep balls that are getting thrown by DJ Lagway. So, it's certainly being in an environment like that, winning some ball games. Yeah, it's going to pay off in recruiting.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we talk all the time, Dave, that recruiting's about hope, and DJ Lagway provides hope. And you sit there and you look at it, you talked about him imagining him throwing you the ball. And or even imagining being on the defensive side of the ball where you don't have to be perfect all the time and you still have the ability to potentially stay in a ball game where you can make some mistakes and the quarterback's going to help you out on the other side. You're looking at a guy who if things fall right, it's going to get a statue out front. And, I think that's probably a little bit of hyperbole, but it's kind of, I imagine where Tennessee fans were when Peyton Manning came in there his first year. And certainly he didn't get a statue, but that's because Florida kept beating them. And so they still have to get a lot of the work done on the field, but you can see a path. And so to me, if he wins this game with Graham Mertz, or if he wins this game with Aiden Warner, maybe with Warner, I'm feeling a little bit differently, but if he wins this game with Warner or Mertz, I'm not saying it's the biggest game of his career. The reason I'm saying it's the biggest game of his career is that the hope that was promised in the DJ Lagway commitment just delivered, which means now there's hope for the future moving forward. And if I'm somebody who looks at it, it's not the win that makes me come. Now, I mean, I was there. It was electric to see a fan base that supports a 4-5 team in that way is something where you go, okay, I've heard about the toxicity of this fan base, but man, if we turn this around, like if this win against LSU is making them go 10-0, like how much of a madhouse is that place, right? And you can start to imagine that, and you can start to think about what that means. And so to me, that's the recruiting pitch. The recruiting pitch is not in these words, but we suck. And look, they still show up. And now we've got hope that we're not going to suck next year and come over here and help us turn this around. You don't want to go to Alabama. They lose 2 games and everybody gets upset. Like everybody goes nuts. You lose 2 games here next year, you're going to be a legend. It's like we're going to welcome you back to the swamp 20 years later to celebrate the turnaround in the playoff appearance, because if Florida goes 10-2 against their next year's schedule, they're played in the playoff. So, that there is a sales opportunity within all of this that I hope Napier doesn't miss, because along with the NIL stuff, along with the revenue sharing stuff that we were talking about earlier, Lagway is an edge, like not just because of the quarterbacks that are coming back, but because anyone who's played the game understands that when there's a guy who's special under center, everything is different. And so, if Graham Mertz wins this game against LSU, it doesn't tell us where the program's headed. It tells us where the program is at this very moment. Instead, what this tells us is this is where the program is at this moment, and it's a snapshot of where it can be. And people can start dreaming about where it can be, which is why if I'm a recruit, I'm reconsidering Florida, and it sounds like a bunch of people are.
You want to add anything there, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as recruiting's changed, as we talk about the money side of things, it's not dissimilar to sometimes with the NFL, right? Where there's that quarterback, that leader that guys want to come play with, and they can attract folks to come play with them. So there is still the money component, but there is that aspect of, is that guy special? Can I play with him? And I think right now that's what we have is a situation where that's why this momentum is so important. It's like what you're talking about, Will. If you can keep the momentum going, if you can keep showing off DJ Lagway as the next potential superstar in college football, and they play well next week and they play well the following week, and you can get to a bowl and play well again on national TV, all of a sudden a lot of folks are going to start noticing, and that's when recruiting, you really do, whether it's the money, whether it's the attention to detail that it does seem like the Napier regime has had, at least dealing with recruits. All of a sudden all that can kind of pull together, and hopefully you can pull together a class, salvage a class, both with high school and then also in the portal.
All right, guys. Well, coming out of Saturday, Florida on Sunday, and here on Monday, get some commitment. So let's get into that. And we'll start with right here in Jacksonville, Tramell Jones, Mandarin quarterback, committing to the Gators right down the road from me right here. So 6 foot, 195 pound, 4-star quarterback, 237 overall in the 24/7 Sports Composite, 21st quarterback in the country there. On-3 industry rankings very similar, as they have Jones 248 overall, 21st quarterback in the country. How it breaks down here is pretty interesting. Both 24/7 and On3's own rankings have Jones as a 3-star, but he's boosted up by ESPN and Rivals, having him as a 4-star prospect on both those services. Rivals lists Jones as a 36th player in the country. So let you know the variance that's out here in the recruiting services here, and they have him as the 4th-ranked quarterback in the country. He decommitted from Florida State last week. This was pretty much a flip. That was a foregone conclusion that a commitment to Florida was coming up after visiting this past weekend for the LSU game. The flirtation had been there for quite some time, thinking this could happen back all the way in the spring. As some public visits to Gainesville, some private visits to Gainesville as well. All those happened. And then take into account the terrible season from Florida State. And here we are with Tramell Jones. So I'll pop up some highlights as we keep on discussing him here. In 2024, this season, Mandarin season just ended last weekend, but he wasn't on the field. He missed all but 2 games this past senior season for him, lower leg injury. He was 2-0 in those 2 games, completed 19 of 21 passes, 90.5% of their 439 yards, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. In 2023, last season, helped power Mandarin to an 11-4 record, and the Sunshine State 4M championship game, completed 183 of 302 passes. That was 60.6%. 3,195 yards, 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Also ran for 132 yards and a touchdown. Became the first 3,000-yard passer in the Gateway Conference since Georgia quarterback Carson Beck, who was also at Mandarin there in 2018. In 2022, led the Mustangs to a 5-5 record, 161 of 277, about 2,300 yards, 23 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. And in 2021, interestingly enough, won the starting job as a freshman at Mandarin, 4-4 record after missing 2 games due to injury, 88 of 160, 55%, 1,253 yards, 14 touchdowns, 5 interceptions as a freshman there at Mandarin. So Andrew Ivins of 24/7 Sports says, an experienced signal caller with cleaner mechanics that has improved in every key statistical category since earning the starting nod as a freshman on varsity. More of a one-read passer at this stage that will feed his playmakers and throw them open. Gets the ball out quick with a compact, repeatable motion, tends to utilize more touch than he does velocity. Will keep his eyes down the field, hunt for the big play. Feet can get a little happy, especially when the interior rush starts building. Has to get better at protecting the football. Lost 11 fumbles the past 2 years. And cut down on the high-risk throws, as the margins will be much smaller on Saturdays. Should be viewed as a potential starter at the Power 4 level that can move the chains with accuracy and anticipation. Mid-sized frame isn't ideal, but can impress with his IQ and work ethic in various settings. So one interesting angle to this, guys, is you got to give him a lot of credit for wanting to come in here the year after DJ Lagway. What we see from Lagway on the field, where it can be tough to get a quality quarterback to come behind the superstar.
Yeah, I mean, I think we always talk about recruiting is about stacking, and when you got a guy like Lagway there, it's like you mentioned, Dave. It's hard to get people to come in afterwards. So certainly says something about his moxie, says something about what he's looking for in terms of his development. I think what you read though is the profile. Look, his ranking and all that sort of stuff are pretty similar to where Anthony Richardson was ranked. But I think the profile is one of a more polished guy than Richardson was, with less physical skills. But the other reality is that there's not a whole lot of DJ Lagways out there. Like go through the entire college football landscape and tell me which guys are changing programs as true freshmen this year. And that's a very short list, if not a list of one. And so when we look at quarterback prospects, especially, we have to make sure that we're at least keeping that in account, is that, yes, I would love for every recruit that comes to Florida to be DJ Lagway, but that's an unreasonable ask. And as we've seen this year, having guys in the 3rd, 4th, 5th position who are effective signal callers is critical, even if they're not as good as your starter. And so stacking those guys behind, like I think I made it sort of a snarky comment earlier this fall about sure would be nice to have Austin Simmons or Jaden Rashada back there going into the Georgia, or coming out of the Georgia game and after the Texas game. And so if nothing else, this is somebody who can provide depth to Florida overall. But the other thing is that you don't want to miss a year where you don't have a quarterback, because DJ Lagway ain't going to be here forever. And so when Lagway leaves, you want some guys who've gotten some experience, gotten some snaps, because if you try to live starting true freshmen at quarterback, even ones with profiles of Lagway, you're going to miss sometimes. And when you do, everything's going to go to hell. And we've seen what happened to Florida State this year with Jordan Travis gone, and they didn't have a plan to replace him at quarterback, at least not a very good one. And Florida State's just fallen apart. And so this is a part of putting together a chain of people, not just to be there in case Lagway gets injured, but also part of a succession plan. And you need to do that year after year. It's not good to skip one.
The other thing you think about too is you got to get some leaders in this recruiting class. And so getting a quarterback in there, getting somebody who is good friends with maybe some guys that we're looking to potentially look at, whether it's Solomon Thomas, whether it's maybe it's Jamie French, and honestly Vernell Brown III, who he's played on that 7-on-7 football team. Like getting some guys who can create a core around, that's such a key thing. And so getting a quarterback in there that can at least be on those threads recruiting, that's a key thing in trying to at least pull this recruiting class together here on quick notice.
Absolutely, great point there, and we will get into some of those names with that thought in mind of Jones coming in. He wasn't the only commitment that came out of this weekend, of course, and that's this past weekend, of course. Now the Gators have another one, and Stephon Shivers, defensive lineman. He was on campus this past weekend, committed to the Gators earlier on this Monday. 6'4.5", 385-pound, 3-star prospect out of Brentwood, Tennessee. Comes in as the 489th overall player, 52nd ranked defensive lineman in the country on the 24/7 Sports Composite. The On3 industry rankings rank him the 449th player overall and the 41st defensive lineman. Had some highlights for him too. So let me get them up. Man, this is live production at its best or at its worst. You guys tell me. But a lot moving on here, of course. But I gotta pause it because guys, you're gonna be blown away by this first highlight here.
You have him as a running back? I saw it earlier.
As a running back, it is the very first highlight that they put on here, which is what they should do. That's ridiculous. And boom, there we go. So you can see he's in the backfield. That is not hard to miss. So if you're watching the YouTube version, there you go. But this first highlight that's scary. I mean, if I'm 16 years old and I got that guy running at me, I am olaying you. You can run right by me. I do not care.
You're making some business decisions, Dave.
That looks like Caleb Banks running at my max. Like that safety looked like he was 9 years old.
Absolutely, I'm making some business decisions as a 16-year-old. Recently decommitted from Georgia here. Did Shivers, and Gators are recruiting Shivers to play nose in the 3 technique on the defensive line. Likes the way Florida uses Des Watson up front. Massive man that can plug the middle here, run well, shows a set of athleticism to make some plays in the backfield. Only stats I couldn't find anything from this year, but in 2023, last year, 2-way player getting snaps at defensive line, offensive tackle, and as we saw, running back. He totaled 90 tackles. He had 20 tackles for loss, 11 sacks per the Jackson Sun, and, of course, just ridiculous playing running back. So I mean, that was like a 60-yard touchdown run that he had there. Two-sport athlete at Brentwood Academy, where he plays basketball as well. So his previous head coach, Hayden Williams, told On3 back in the spring, quote, just seeing the kid, his size, his quickness, the speed he plays with, he's just a different animal. He's a special kid. Not a lot of 350-pound kids that move that well. It's really as simple as that. His biggest thing for me is his initial quickness. That first step is an elite first step. Off the ball, it's quick as can be, 6'5", 350, so you don't usually see first steps like he has. So that's probably 1A. 1B, his size. He's massive, especially in the interior of that defensive line. He's a good run stopper, but the quickness in the first step really helps him in the pass rush game as well. So I could see him being a 3-down defensive lineman instead of a specialist here or there, in the quote. So, and going back when he committed to Georgia, 24/7 Sports, Benjamin Wolk, quote said, I had the chance to see Shivers for the first time at the All-American Bowl Combine in San Antonio at the beginning of the year. His listing varies depending on where you look, but I'm told recently verified 6'4", 355. Does it take a genius to realize that prototype doesn't grow on trees? There are a select few people who have the ability to play zero tech in Georgia's defense on an annual basis, and Shiver is certainly one of them. This is a guy who wows people with his reaction time at the line of scrimmage as much as his sheer size. Shivers is probably someone who could play one tech out of the 3 tech if asked, but given his skill set, you'll get a lot of Jordan Davis comps in terms of how the Bulldogs are likely to use him. And then back in April, Tom Loy had this to say about Shivers at the Under Armour camp in Nashville. With him being committed to Georgia at the time, it was clear the 6'3", 355-pounder from the class of 2025 was no slouch. After watching him work Sunday, it was clear why the Bulldogs pushed so hard for the high school standout. He was powerful, ragdolled offensive lineman at times, still learning the position, but his strength and quick burst can't be taught. There weren't any offensive linemen that could truly stop him. There you go. Shivers joins Jalen Wiggins, Jeremiah McLeod as the players up front for the Gators defense in this class right now. And, of course, hopefully plug that middle in the coming years. We just talked about Caleb Banks. We just talked about that group and what they were able to do Saturday. Certainly adding a big, massive option here.
So anytime you can steal a guy from Georgia, I'm for it. That's certainly.
They'll say he was processed.
That's sort of sure he was. He wasn't a take. Like I remember those days when a guy wasn't a take because you had scholarship limitations. And all
I'm sure his recruiting score dropped a couple of points after he left Georgia.
I'll tell you right now, I'm looking at that tape going, how is that guy a 3-star?
Yeah.
And then the other thing that jumps to mind is next year against Tennessee, if we have 4th and inches with Lagway and that guy in the backfield, there should be no end arounds. Like refrigerator Perry that thing, man. It's 4th and inches, just absolutely destroy the defense. Look, obviously I'm in amongst boys there. The level of competition I'm going to assume, given the size of some of those guys that he was throwing around like rag dolls, is relatively low where he's playing. But I mean, Brentwood Academy isn't like,
he just transferred there, by the way, this year.
So we'll see some of those highlights as it comes. But I mean, like there's some scary vision in some of those runs where you see him like make a cut to the outside when the defender crashes and you go, huh, well, that's interesting. And I do wonder whether that kind of vision translates when you move a guy either to the offensive or defensive line and say, okay, is this guy going to understand, because he's played running back, the gap discipline should be something that comes pretty easy. Whereas I think oftentimes the guys who are more athletic, their first instinct is to sort of jump out of the gap because they're trying to make a play. Because in high school, that works. And in college, the 350-pounder across from you just goes, all right, you want to jump out of the gap? I'll continue pushing you that way. And all of a sudden there's a giant hole. Now, I mean, look, I think when you're talking about the 489th ranked guy in the country, this isn't somebody that we should probably expect to make an impact in 2025. It's somebody that you're really sort of planning to make an impact down the road. But it's cool to see that film because there's obviously a lot of potential there. And whenever Georgia wants somebody and Florida gets them, that makes me happy.
100%. I'll say if the SEC is a line of scrimmage league, you can get size anywhere you can get size and add to some of that depth. It's important. So now who knows kind of where an 18-year-old ends up, but ultimately, like you said, well, he's big. Maybe they can put him in that Jack Pyburn position that they had him at that fullback running some of those plays. You definitely wouldn't want to see him coming that way, but if you can get some size on the defensive line, they've hit on some guys here in recent years too. Michael Burrow has had a really good year this year, kind of showing up here as a freshman. He's kind of ranked similarly. So hopefully probably more of a project, but you never know.
Hey, there ain't many 6'5", 385s out
teach
there. Hey, guys, with these two commitments now, Florida up to 31st in the country on the 24/7 Sports Composite. Certainly much better than what it was looking like just a week ago. 14 commitments right now, about 3 weeks till early signing day. So, of course, rounding out that, hopefully, let's get into some targets and we'll sign off right here on this episode of Gators Breakdown. But, of course, Jamie French, Tramell Jones, teammate here at Mandarin in Jacksonville, 5-star wide receiver, currently committed to Texas. Florida's chances with French seem to be improving. We'll see where this goes with some in Gainesville, so they think they have a shot. Impressed by DJ Lagway's performance in the win over LSU. Likes to play with the idea of possibly playing with his teammate Jones in college as well. Florida feeling better about their chances, but still a lot of work to do. Has come out and said, and I was told this last week as well, here in Jacksonville, a lot of people wondered what that announcement for Billy Napier and that vote of confidence was going to produce. I told it had some ramifications in that Mandarin locker room. So it certainly seemed to play out that way. He even admitted that the clarity on Napier's future and the Lagway presence are really helping Florida's case here. Another 5-star receiver, Dallas Wilson, currently committed to Oregon. And, of course, he had a good unofficial visit to Florida. And, look, guys, he just set an official visit to come back next week for this coming up week for the Ole Miss game. Also impressed by DJ Lagway's performance. The thought there is distance from home becoming a factor. So, maybe that helps for him as well. Could benefit Florida. Says Florida's currently sitting in the number 2 spot. Let's go back to Jacksonville. 5-star interior offensive lineman Solomon Thomas. They're at Raines High School. Still committed to FSU. Visited Florida this past weekend. Good visit, he says. Florida, LSU, FSU, main contenders right now. NIL, very important here in this one. Is impressed with Florida's improved offensive line performance. And look, that is a group that has certainly gotten better as this season has come along. Early playing time a factor as well. Another offensive lineman to look out for, maybe on commit watch, Daniel Pierre-Louis, currently committed to FSU. Visited Florida for an official visit this past weekend. Strong relationship with offensive line coach John DeCoster. Florida, I think in great shape here. A 24/7 Sports crystal ball pick has been logged there for him. Joseph Mbachu, 4-star defensive lineman from Grayson, Georgia, is a former Florida commit, decommitted, but now reconsidering the Gators, noticing Florida's improved defensive performance, and Napier's job security helped there as well. Had a recent visit to Florida and Texas. That's the 2 schools generating the most buzz. One of my top targets right here, seems like Florida keeps chipping away and making a move here. 4-star offensive lineman Tavares Dice, committed to Auburn, unofficially visited Florida this past weekend. Florida long viewed as competition with Auburn here. Florida has a shot. Some think more than others, so we'll see where this one goes. A marathon race going down to the wire. May visit Auburn this coming up weekend. That's about the highlights there. Naeem offered another Ohio State cornerback commit. He's a 5-star. He visited Florida. Not sure that one really plays out for Florida. I think that one's probably the longest shot out of most of these here. But no surprise, as we kind of already alluded to, guys, the performance of DJ Lagway, the vote of confidence for Billy Napier, hopefully pays off.
Yeah, I think this is going to be interesting to see. So in terms of 2025, the 5-star guys are the guys that you watch out for, right? So Wilson, Thomas, and French are the 3 guys that you go, those are the guys who are going to have an impact on the field to start with. Maybe you get some top 100 guys who can potentially do that as well. But think about like Napier's first class. And that first year, it was Etienne and Shamar James who were adding something to the fold. And so, I get the stability of a year for Napier impacting these guys' decisions, but I think in terms of who's actually going to help in 2025, this has always been my concern, is there's sort of a moral hazard in terms of leaning towards the portal rather than high school recruiting. So if they're bringing in 5-star guys, then and then they go raid the portal. Well, now you've built up the program for short and long-term success. And regardless of what happens with Billy Napier after 2025, you haven't skipped the recruiting class, which I think is a valuable thing. So, so to me, those are the guys I'm looking at specifically. I'm looking at Wilson, Thomas, and French, and maybe not all three of them, but if Florida can get 2 of those 3 combined with Vernell Brown, the third, and Ben Hanks, all of a sudden now you're talking about a class that's probably like, I don't know, 11th, 12th, somewhere in that range, at least an average player ranking. Maybe they don't get up there just because the volume isn't as high as it has been in the past. But, this has always been the case, is that Florida's recruiting class, even when it was 51st, it was not hideous in terms of the player quality. It's just there weren't many players in the class. So a team like, NC State had 21 commits and was in front of Florida. So each time Florida gets a commit, they jump from 51st to 34th. And so the next time they get a commit, they'll go from, 31st right now to 23rd. And we'll be looking at a class that's sitting in the 16, 17 range if they don't get any of those 5-stars. If they get 1 5-star, they're probably in the 14, 15 range. They get 2 5-stars, they're knocking on the top 10. And if they pull in all 3, well, now you got 4 5-stars in the class. Now you're talking about you're going to jump a bunch of folks there, and maybe you even end up in like the top 6, top 7, which would be a major coup considering where Florida's been. But what that would require is signing a quality of player much, much higher than they have gotten to commit thus far. And so that'll be the question. I think this sort of goes to the whole point of the first half of the episode here. We were talking to Dave about what Florida is set up to do. And, you mentioned Thomas being an NIL, like that being heavy. Look, that's a consideration for every one of these guys.
I was about to say he's really not the only one, but it was pointed out in some of his post interviews. So.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, I think the point though is that NIL is a consideration for all these guys. If the money's equivalent, then they're going to make decisions on something else.
Correct.
And I think Florida's job specifically with these 5-star guys is to provide all that something else and then make sure the money's not equivalent. Because I would rather have the 3 5-stars and then no depth beneath it than all the depth beneath it and none of the 5-stars. I think there's ample evidence that you top load the class as best you can. And so, if it takes all $20.5 million or whatever that revenue share is to bring in those 3 guys, do it.
Yeah. Dave, a lot of 904 Jacksonville love in that list.
But it feels like if Florida football is ever going to be Florida football again, you have to be doing well in Duval. You have to be doing well in Tampa and Hillsborough. You have to be doing well in Lakeland and Central Florida. Like there has to be sort of re-owning some of this recruiting territory. And so some of these guys have been looking elsewhere. They seem to be giving Florida a second look. Dallas Wilson, it'll be interesting to see whether he takes that trip to Oregon for that last weekend of the year. Mm-hmm. He was also supposed to go to FSU. There was a lot of talk of him going to Florida State and going to visit Florida State. So there is the potential, maybe if he was here last week, maybe he'll be back in Gainesville this week, and maybe he'll see the Gators a 3rd week in a row. So that's something to watch too here. And then I think we're talking about the portal, and portal's difficult when you're talking about especially offensive linemen. So Tavares Dice is somebody that to keep an eye on, especially as Auburn struggles. Maybe we can do the same thing that Auburn did to us last year. They started picking our class clean a little bit once there was some issues that we were showing. Auburn's had plenty of issues this year. They continue to have some issues. You never know. Maybe we could return the favor on a few of these kids like Dice and Autry.
Yeah, and it's funny, Billy Napier, like I said, the soundbite that I play, everybody wants to tell me wins, losses don't matter. Well, it mattered last year for Florida. It looks like it's mattering a little bit this year for Auburn and Florida State. I mean, look, some of these targets that Florida's getting in on now, you can't tell me it's not because those 2 schools are struggling in the win-loss column right now. It has a huge part to do with it. Yeah,
the instability, just that talk that sort of rises up. I mean, it's why it's hard, and it's what Will was saying at the beginning of this. I mean, there's risk in keeping Billy at this point, right? I mean, there certainly is, and part of it's what we're watching with recruiting. Those issues that have sort of happened because people don't know if you're going to be around. And, so if you lose again next year, then you're in a terrible situation. But for right now, you got some momentum. where we were at. Keep the momentum going. If you can keep the momentum going on the recruiting trail, on the football field, then maybe there's some special things that could happen that maybe we weren't anticipating a few weeks ago.
Man, that word has been so allergic in the last few years. So hopefully momentum is not as allergic anymore. Maybe the reaction is not so bad.
That's it.
Yeah, let's see. Beat Ole Miss, and we'll have a completely different discussion next week, man.
Let's go.
I already got people want me to fly Max down so they can take him to the game. It's like
Jacksonville's an easy flight, so I can pick him up.
There you go. You can take him to the press box, man. He'll never sit with me anymore. I'll be like, I want to go with Uncle Dave.
Oh, good stuff. Hey, Dave, man, thanks for hopping in. Unexpected hour and a half episode here, but
thanks for putting up with me. I liked it. It was a lot of fun, man. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff on like I said, the angle. We don't know a whole lot, or I don't know a whole lot about. I don't want to speak for Will, but I don't know enough about that angle of what's going on outside of the football field and how everything is playing out in the world of college football and out Florida and how it's affecting them. So a lot of good stuff, man.
Yeah, we'll keep talking about it.
For sure. Will, what you got coming up this week, man?
Recap article I got to get up because I can't ignore it when things are going well. When I crap on things when it's going bad, and then obviously we'll have an Ole Miss preview up this week as well. So.
All right. That'll do it for this episode of Gators Breakdown. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thank you for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.